The only thing that has changed is that since October 7th, like a lot of people, he's begun to focus on the relationship with the United States and Israel, questioning why we give them so much money, why we pay for their wars, why we deploy our military to protect Israel in their wars. This concern and intense campaign to destroy Tucker, and I agree absolutely by proxy to try and either get JD Vance to renounce Tucker or present him with the choice, renounce Tucker or be destroyed with him.
Glenn Greenwald just shared the truth about the Zionist campaign to take out and destroy Tucker Carlson. And in this clip with Megyn Kelly, he discusses the MAGA civil war of sorts that you're seeing play out between the Israel First forces of Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin against people like Tucker Carlson for daring to expose the truth and critiques of Israel. So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
While we're on the subject of Tucker Carlson, he is under just an insane amount of pressure right now over his Fuentes interview, over his podcast, and it's getting like truly crazy. It's really getting crazy. And you pointed out this article in the New York Times, which hit Saturday, entitled "JD Vance is idling at the edges of American politics." And you wrote this. Very shortly, you're going to hear this from Democrats in the media. Look, I had disagreements with Trump, but he kept the crazies on the fringes. The really dangerous extremist is J.D. Vance. Trump, by comparison, is a responsible patriot. That's the Bush-Cheney trajectory. And you tweeted out this article. To me, I think 95% of the pressure that's raining down on Tucker right now is as a result of his close friendship with J.D. Vance, because they fear and loathe him in a particularly pointed way. And they think if they can like stank up Tucker enough, they can then transfer it onto JD, thus improving their electoral chances in 2028. Your thoughts on it?
Well, before we weigh in on that, no, it's not 95% because of J.D. Vance. It's his views on Israel. And I get that the two are intertwined. J.D. Vance has very close associations with Israel and the Israel lobby too, by the way. And Peter Thiel, one of the hardest core technocrats that is in the bed with Israel, and Palantir and the CIA at the same time, by the way. But it is because of his openness in his critiques toward Israel. That's the truth. It's not about Fuentes. It's not about changing his opinions on technology, which are out of the mainstream too, but they don't talk about that. It's only because he's critical of Israel. That's the truth.
No question, Democrats hate J.D. Vance, fear J.D. Vance, as I would too if I were a partisan Democrat. But I think it's important to note that most of the attacks on Tucker are not coming from liberals or Democrats. They are coming from factions with inside the conservative,
the neocon right.
Exactly. And that, I mean, if it were just the, liberals and Democrats, it wouldn't matter. Tucker wouldn't even bat an eye. It wouldn't, it's when it comes from your own movement inside your own faction in your own party when it really becomes something quite notable and difficult to navigate. And here's the thing, Macon, when Tucker was on Fox and had the highest rated show on Fox up until the day that he was fired, I don't think I ever heard a prominent conservative criticize Tucker. Probably not because they didn't disagree with him. I'm sure they did, but because he was so popular that nobody would. In fact, when Tucker was fired, I think people have forgotten this, there were a bunch of members of the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, who ran to Politico and said how happy they were that Tucker was gone because now they could more easily fund the war in Ukraine, which Tucker was a major voice in opposing. And they all did it, though, anonymously. These are members of the Senate who wanted to criticize Tucker and say how happy they were gone, but only did so anonymously. So that shows his power within the conservative movement. The only thing that has changed is that since October 7th, like a lot of people, he's begun to focus on the relationship with the United States and Israel, questioning why we give them so much money, why we pay for their wars, why we deploy our military to protect Israel in their wars, why are politicians constantly going there, why we're introducing censorship regimes and laws inside the United States to protect this foreign country. That's the only thing that's different between the Tucker of now and the Tucker of then.
That's exactly right. Glenn has this exactly right. And yeah, there were some criticisms of neocons toward Tucker over the interview with Putin and over the fact that Tucker, completely rejected the Ukraine first mentality, just as he now rejects the Israel first mentality. That is true, but the attacks weren't nearly this vicious and, this obvious and this apparent. Here's another thing. Tucker, did change his views to some extent on trade policy. Tucker's, a pretty ardent protectionist, by the way. I'm not, for the record. I love Tucker, but I don't agree with him on this. He's generally a trade protectionist, and he came that way from originally not being so. But the Ben Shapiros and Mark Levins and Laura Loomers and Randy Fines and Lindsey Grahams of the world don't care about that. You can change your position on something of that importance, which that is a big issue, is trade policy and protectionism in the United States, but it won't invite nearly the same kind of attacks that Tucker is getting from the Zionist crowd. It's because he rejects the Israel first mentality. He dares to say we have to prioritize America above that foreign regime or any foreign regime that they have gone to war with him. So Glenn is right.
And so this concern and an intense campaign to destroy Tucker, and I agree absolutely by proxy to try and either get J.D. Vance to renounce Tucker or present him with the choice, renounce Tucker or be destroyed with him, is all about demanding that J.D. Vance embrace the neocon ideology in general and their love and support and loyalty to Israel in particular, because there's no other way to isolate or understand these attacks on Tucker except by reference to that.
Yeah, that's true. They want to dehabilitate J.D. Vance because he's the clear frontrunner for the Republican nomination right now. In 2028, a lot can happen. Jeb Bush was the frontrunner in the Republican Party in 2016, but right now he's a prime target despite the fact that he's been very close to Israel in the past. The Israel First lobby wants to, dig their claws into him, much as like the Adelson were able to dig their claws into Trump, demand that kind of fealty to Hasbara and Israel, and getting into wars in Iran and Syria and Libya, as the Zionists always wanted, and the neocons. That's what we're seeing here and how it's spilling over to J.D. Vance, despite the fact it really is over Israel.
Now, you are as good a witness as I could find on this issue. I have explained to, I have many Jewish friends who have questions about Tucker's coverage and whether, he sort of turned into an anti-Semite. And I tell them all, absolutely not. I know Tucker very well, and he is not an anti-Semite. And he is not pro-Israel. He's not a big fan of Israel. And he's definitely not a fan of Netanyahu. But some of them say, well, I think it's beyond that. And I asked them all the same thing, Glenn. If you go back pre-10/7, do you remember Tucker being a leading Israel critic? Like, I remember you being an Israel critic. You're not anti-Semitic, but that was an issue that you definitely talked a lot about.
Yeah, Glenn is Jewish on both sides of his family, by the way, but that crowd will call Norman Finkelstein a Jew hater, too, by the way, even though he's the son of 2 Holocaust survivors. They'll do the same thing to Glenn. But Megyn Kelly, for all her faults, she does fence it on the Israel issue, clearly so, is right that that's really the only thing of significance that Tucker has changed on since October 7th, that they've been so visceral in their attacks over. There's nothing else. Nothing else explains it.
Did Tucker? No, he didn't.
Never.
Tucker was, I don't know if he likes the word isolationist or not, but he was definitely sort of becoming the face of the isolationist right. And he had interviews. I remember the one he did with Viktor Orban in Hungary, and they talked all about it. And then he was constantly saying, why would our kids have to go and fight this battle? Why are we being so bellicose about this particular issue? He was very hot against the Ukraine thing. He didn't want us to get dragged into that. That was long before 10/7. And then when 10/7 happened, he was like, I don't want to be involved in that one either. And that happened to be a very close ally that we felt was getting us closer and closer to conflict. And then indeed, actually in conflict with Iran, which Tucker was against openly.
She almost says it, that Israel drugged the United States into conflict with Iran, the obvious thing we all know. But she won't put the two together and see how that's totally negative for America and just wants to fence it. But to her credit, at least she's talking about that as a realistic thing, as a reality that Americans are watching that do follow this. And notice, the mass noticing happens. The mass noticing awakening is taking place as we see.
If Tucker really just had this thing where he can't stand Jews or he's long hated Israel, we would know, Glenn. He would have been out there saying this stuff before 10/7. The fact that it happened after that shows you it really is about Israel for him and dovetails perfectly with his more isolationist worldview and what he wants for America first.
Well, now she's being honest. That is the most honest statement she's had in this video. I think isolationism is a dumb term. Basically, no one promotes that in terms of what it actually meant in classical sense, where you didn't have any diplomacy with those countries, you didn't trade with those countries. Non-interventionism is the proper term because, I think Tucker and most non-interventionists do want diplomacy and trade and are trying to avert isolationism, the isolationism that has come from building an American empire to isolate America from the rest of the world and galvanize BRICS and other competitor alliances with NATO because of it. That's the truth.
Megan, I am Jewish. My whole family's Jewish. I grew up Jewish. I'm steeped in Jewish culture and always have been my entire life. And Tucker and I have a very close friendship. I mean, we used to hate each other, and then our politics started aligning, and then we got to know each other as people. And I consider him a very close friend. And I'm not here as a witness to say, oh, I'm Jewish and he's not an anti-Semite. But what I am here to say is that for me, the animating experience in Tucker's life in terms of his politics and journalism was the fact that he feels like he failed in his obligations and was betrayed when he constantly went on television and advocated for the war in Iraq and for broader neoconservative war-making policy that he believed is so destructive to the United States. He believed he helped spread lies about it. It led to the deaths of many people. And he feels determined never to make that mistake again, to kind of repent for the policies that he advocated that he believes were so destructive.
I think Glenn is hitting the nail on the head here with the appeal that Tucker has for admitting his past mistakes, something that no one in the regime political establishment ever does. On the liberal side, on the conservative side, they just don't repent for their misdeeds, especially ones that lead men to their deaths, as they were led to their deaths in the war in Iraq, a 20-year occupation for nothing, with the whole world war on terror costing something like $8 trillion, killing something like 5 million people in total in Afghanistan over 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. Those are misdeeds by the American regime. Tucker notices that, and he repents for that. And he talks about it a lot. He's humble. He has humility. It's something that I would like to have a penance for too. I was once a neocon, and this channel's existence is partially to try to make a peace and atone for past sins in terms of propaganda. I was just a young man. I didn't have influence then whatsoever. But at the same time, I think people connect with that. They see that in themselves, especially the distant world outside of the right that says, hey, I was wrong about all these things in the past. And, I see them for what they are now. They were murder sprees. There were murder schemes. And because of that, people that have gone through that, like Tucker, are people that I want to connect with. Glenn sees that. I think he's exactly right about that.
By sharing with everybody why he came to believe that they are so destructive. Now, I used to kind of needle Tucker about the fact that, oh, look, you go on Fox every night and you talk about how wrong it is that the United States spends billions of dollars to send to Ukraine. And I totally agreed with that. I was on his show all the time talking about that. But we do the same to Israel, yet you never mention that. You never once mentioned Israel. Why is that? And he would just sort of say like, oh, I don't think it's as important. We don't say. So he was actively like moving away from that.
Yeah, he was. He certainly was. I didn't get past that in the clip, but Glenn is right. And I'm so happy, by the way, that Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson, two of the best dissident voices in the country, two of the best independent journalists in the entire country, are good friends, by the way, after being at odds. And let's be real, Tucker changed more than Glenn did. Glenn's always been a critic of Israel as long as I've known him. He's always been deeply concerned about non-interventionist foreign policy and constraining the regime's attempt to subvert our civil liberties. That's how he got his start. Railing against the Bush administration and their torture schemes that John Kiriakou courageously unveiled and blew the whistle for, attacking the Patriot Act and the rise of the surveillance state being key in divulging the facets of lies around this huge tyrannical edifice that the NSA had built to gather mass data on all of us and engage in mass surveillance, shredding the Fourth Amendment. That's how Glenn got his start. And at that time, Tucker Carlson was essentially a neocon. He was on Crossfire and various other networks throughout the years, backing the neocon line. By the way, I did. Until 2004, I did that. I was a young college student, organizing in these America Patriot rallies. And what that was, it was anti-American rallies. That's what those were. It was to cheer on the war effort, invade Iraq, do exactly what Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney and George Bush and Bill Kristol want. It's preposterous. It's embarrassing to admit this, but I do feel more liberated as I kind of tell these stories and how, I see the wrong for what that was the same way that Tucker did. And I'm so glad those two have that common bond over these issues, even though they clearly disagree on some issues. But that's what we want. We want kind-hearted discussions where Americans observe the debates, observe the interviews, make their own decisions, and they're not gatekept by this Israel First lobby, which is, by the way, is at the crux of the antipathy toward Tucker Carlson and the MAGA civil war. It's not over anything other than Israel and the issues that flow from the Israeli relationship with the United States, including censorship, including, constraining disaster relief for critics of Israel, which came up in the news a few days ago, with rewriting state speech code laws to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, call critiques of Israel hate speech like many states have done. I'm sorry to say. That's the crux of it. I think Glenn has it exactly right. It's not J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is connected to these issues to some extent, but it is the Israel issue. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Do you think Tucker is right about his critiques of Israel? Do you think Glenn understands this issue better than others? What do you think about this issue in general? Have the Zionist America lasters lost this argument? Are Americans just going to turn away and never come back to this? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Megyn Kelly. Not a fan of her not taking a position on the greater Israel issue, very much, if at all. Still calling herself a Zionist, but at the same time, she has Glenn Greenwald on her program. I have to give that to her. A lot of people would not want her to talk to Glenn Greenwald, including her friend Ben Shapiro. But let me know down below your thoughts. Also, if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. If you do that, you can help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a site. You just plug in your email at that site. I'll shoot it to you in PDF form, absolutely free, no obligation, just because you are awesome. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.